Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Inside segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, a Medical Monday conversation, a conversation every parent, coach, and player needs to hear. We're talking about youth football and exhaustion, although actually we could probably be talking about any sport that young people are participating in. But as summer practices ramp up, so do the risks that come with intense physical and author of the books, Can My Child Play? The Questions We Should Have Asked, and the fifth quarter, A Parent's Guide to Preparing Student Athletes for Life Beyond the Game. And of course, Dr. William Strudwick, Chair of the Emergency Department at Howard University Hospital. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining this important Medical Monday conversation.
Pleasure to be here.
Sure thing. So let me first start with, one of the really, important questions or issues surrounding this. And this is really kind of foundational, Dr. Strudwick. When you talk about, heat exhaustion and the like, what exactly is that?
Well, it's we're all affected by the heat, right? So when it gets hot and humid, the body responds in a physiological way. So the heart beats faster, beats stronger, pushes blood toward the skin to help create sweat, and that sweat evaporates and cools the body. In addition to that, our kidneys work harder to retain water for hydration, and so that's what normally happens. And additionally, if we're able-bodied, what do? We drink some additional water. We get ourselves to a cool place. We may jump in a pool, right? But there are times when that's not possible. And if you think about who we're obliged to protect, as an able-bodied person, you have to make sure that your kids are able to get to a cool place because they can't do that independently. And you also have to be aware of your elderly parents, aunts and uncles, and make sure that they're okay. And make sure that you check on them. Mm-hmm. But because they do not respond the same way physiologically, especially elderly people, they don't feel the heat as much. They may be in a hot room for several days before somebody comes and checks on them, and they become dehydrated, and they go from a mild heat-related illness to heat exhaustion and potentially to heat stroke. So heat exhaustion, back to the main question, is when you start feeling extremely fatigued, extremely weak. You can become dizzy. You can become nauseous. You can begin to vomit in response to being exposed to the heat for an extended period.
Mm-hmm. So you just talked about heat exhaustion, but what about heat stroke? What's the difference?
Okay, so heat stroke is actually a medical emergency. That's what we see in the emergency department. So it's when the heat exhaustion progresses. Usually with heat exhaustion, you're still sweating profusely. That's part of the picture. But when the body stops being able to accommodate and physiologically accommodate for the heat, when the sweating stops and then the core temperature starts to rise, sometimes it can rise above 104 degrees. And that's when a lot of the other physiological workings of the body start to halt. You can become confused. You can have a seizure. And so that's when, that, as I said, that's a medical emergency. Never wait, call 911 in that situation. Get to the nearest hospital as quick as you can. And it's also could potentially be fatal. Interesting thing about it is we think that in terms of heat-related illnesses and events that heat stroke and heat exhaustion, progression from heat exhaustion is the biggest killer, heat-related killer in the United States. It kills more people than heat-related tornadoes or heat-related hurricanes or even floods.
Wow. One of the important reasons why we are doing this story is because, unfortunately, as it relates to young athletes, youth athletes, not professionals, but youth athletes, that this continues to happen. I'm sure, Marty, that you are familiar with the incident in Tennessee just last month, where 16-year-old Joshua Henderson, he died due to complications from organ failure. He was practicing on his high school football field on July 6th when he collapsed. He had been hospitalized after collapsing and passed away on the 28th, I believe. And this is very, very similar to what happened to your son, Jordan. If you don't mind, kind of share with us what happened.
So, yeah, as Doc just said, really, a lot of times these incidents usually happen always during the first couple of days of practice. Doc used some medical terms in regards to physiology and stuff like that. In layman's terms, when you start talking about heat, Harold, basically, I always, since I do a lot of education on this, I always explain it. What I read while Jordan was in the process of fighting for his life is when your core body reaches up above 104 degrees, that's the equivalent of your body being in a microwave oven, right? Everything starts to cook, organs cooking. You literally have a 20 to 30 minute window to cool a person down before damage becomes irreparable. So in our case, they were doing too much too quick. First day of practice. Obviously, really, I try to refrain from using my personal opinion just because, we become such a voice for this, right? And Jordan's become the poster boy for this. So, a lot of times you really don't know what happened, what was in place when these types of incidents happen. Especially, I know what wasn't in place in our situation. Jordan, they were running gassers the very first day of conditioning drills, which is really gassers. So they were running from one field goal to the next field goal within a certain amount of time, right? Okay. You got a 300-pound lineman running that distance within this short period of time without any rest breaks. So Jordan became overheated probably on the 6th or 7th rep. And unfortunately, the athletic trainers on the field that day didn't.
My apologies. We had a little technical issue there, but Marty, you were saying that you were explaining what was happening with your son, Jordan.
Correct. So basically they were running gassers, and when Jordan was in distress, he started to jog back. A couple of his teammates saw he was in distress. They helped him complete the rep, and then they handed him off to the athletic trainers. And as Doc said, like that whole escalation from heat exhaustion to heat stroke escalated quickly. So, he really went through, from our understanding, like all of the central nervous dysfunction. So that kind of appearance of being drunk, just kind of like out of it, you can become physically violent, like central nervous dysfunction, all that's a matter of heat. So Jordan's case escalated into him having a seizure. They never really applied any type of cool down method on him beyond the cold water packs to his head, back and under his arm and his groin, However, they never immersed him in any type of cold water immersion, cold water tubs, or anything like that, just due to, they thought he may have drowned. They thought he had the possibility to drown when, he was in distress or when that central nervous dysfunction was kicking in. So imagine somebody having an appearance like they're drunk. Now, 3 or 4 years later, when I had an opportunity to really sit down with the athletic trainer that was on the field, I could really visualize, like, okay, here's a guy that might be 5'6", 5'7", that may weigh 140 pounds with a 50-pound rock in his pocket, versus here's a 300-pound kid that's in this violent state, and I understand where, I wasn't there to make the call, but they didn't immerse him in that cold water. And unfortunately, it may have been over an hour and 30 minutes before they got him to the ER, to some type of help. But again, our case, and the interesting thing about our case was, 3 days after this had happened, Tuesday, this happened May 29th, and we were having a conversation with an emergency liver organ transplant doctor Friday morning, stating that, if we didn't make a decision for emergency liver transplant, Jordan would be dead within 12 hours. And 85% of his liver was in necrosis. So, imagine, and keep in mind, Harold and Dr. Strudwick, I didn't know anything about any of this at that time. So this train was moving very, very fast. But what happened was, I think my personal opinion was, all of Jordan's organs had really cooked while he was on the field. Because again, like I said, keep that I think that's the best way to explain heat stroke to a layman, is that when you're over 104, your body is your organs are in a microwave oven and they're cooking. And if you don't cool a person down within that 20 to 30 minute window, like I said, damage becomes irreparable at that point.
It's kind of like, even for someone who may have the flu and they have an elevated temperature. And as we know, you don't have to be, an athlete.
Sure.
You can just be sick and your flu gets up, and we know that, once it gets, above, 99 or 100 degrees, your doctor is already saying that's, the danger level. Correct, Dr. Strudwick?
Absolutely. Yeah, we try to treat the fever as an entity in itself. Of course, we're treating the flu, but at the same time, we're getting that temperature down to keep it out of the danger area.
Yeah. And I would, correct me if I'm wrong, Marty, but as a result of the incident with your son, there were major changes made at the University of Maryland regarding exposure to heat during practices and the like.
Oh yeah,
Can
absolutely.
I just say, before you talk, there have been major changes everywhere because of your son.
Right.
Not just at the University of Maryland, like across the board in athletic programs across the board. So just thinking about the what your son's death did for safety overall has been tremendous, and just awareness. So go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt
you. I think interesting thing, Harold, and Dr. Strudwick, was Jordan had fell in those predictable statistics at that time. Like 2 to 3 linemen were dying every year in college football. Right? You can go back, look at the numbers from 2018 from 2000 to 2018. Jordan may have been number 30 or 31. It was another young man that literally passed that summer, that August, named Brayton Bradford. He was at a school in Kansas City. I just talked to his dad yesterday. So we were losing linemen. However, I think our story just got so publicized in the media that it brought that attention to it. And a lot of schools, I think at that time, were just like, you know what, wait a minute, we really don't want this attention. So at the collegiate level, the numbers have diminished significantly. However, still at the high school and youth level, unfortunately, we're still losing kids, unfortunately.
I need to take a really quick break, but there's so much about this topic that we're going to dive into afterwards. So Don't forget, you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Inside segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is coming up next. That's on WHUR-FM. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our Medical Monday conversation about youth sports and heat exhaustion. My guests are Marty McNair, founder and president of the Jordan McNair Foundation, and Dr. William Strudwick, chair of the emergency department at Howard University Hospital. I did want to talk specifically about one of the things I think is rather fascinating, which is not to say that these things do not happen, but why, Dr. Strudwick, do you believe that we are still seeing these things happen on the collegiate level and for high school sports, but not on the pro level? What is it that the NFL, when you're talking about football, for example, what is the NFL doing that apparently is not happening in high school sports, for example?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is just the different level of conditioning. So in high school, you have such variability. Kids that come from not being active at all onto the football field in August. You don't have that at the collegiate level, so you're probably going to see less effects, and you certainly don't have that at the pro level. In addition, the awareness, the finances of it all, these are, at the pro level, certainly these are million, now $1 billion athletes. So the level of resources, doctors on the field, monitoring, constant monitors of their heart rate and their condition is all there. So it makes it less likely that these incidents will occur. I can say at the collegiate level, just being on Howard's campus as the emergency director, I'm in touch with the athletic department. We talk on a regular basis, and certainly when the practice started for football this year, I was aware. My emergency physicians were aware and prepared that if any kids had any issues, we would get them to the emergency department immediately if they needed that. Treat them emergently prior to anything progressing to even close to heat stroke. Get ahead of it well before that. And just the awareness of hydration, of stretching, getting your body prepared. All those things have reduced it at all levels, but certainly again at the lower levels, just a different levels of conditioning make a difference.
So to that point, Dr. Strudwick, particularly when we're talking about high school, if a student athlete begins to show these signs, kind of walk us through what every parent should know, what coaches should know, what high school athletic directors should know. I mean, certainly this should be an issue or of concern for all elite, let's say, high school athletes. But as we know, it's very different in the South, compared to high school athletes, in the Northeast, not just with the weather, right, but really the kind of, dare I say, the religiosity of high school football. And right, the Floridas, the Georgias, the Texas, the Tennessees, as opposed to, Maryland and Virginia and Delaware and Pennsylvania.
Right. Hey, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
And Dr. Strudwick, I think we're the two perfect guests because we're really right on the same page. Let me kind of address, Harold, what you said about the NFL, right? Resources. Corey Stringer was the only. We can't forget Corey Stringer, which was obviously over 20 years ago. He was the NFL player that had a heat stroke with the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, you have the Corey Stringer Institute. They're the mega resource for a lot of us. I think the Jordan McNair Foundation is more of the resource from a grassroots perspective, right? So when you talk about resources, meaning you have over 21,000 high schools in the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they literally fall into two baskets: those that have resources versus those that don't have resources, right? And what that means is, obviously from, as Dr. Strudwick just said, you have medical professionals. Look at Damar Hamlin, right? Nobody knew what a real emergency action plan was until they saw one in motion, right? A perfectly executed emergency action plan, right? But again, resources. You have the medical professionals on the field, right? And they're waiting for something to happen. That's what their job is. Let's wait for something to happen and we'll execute. At the collegiate level,
And hold on, just and real quick, hold your point. For those of you who may not be familiar, Damar Hamlin is the Buffalo Bills cornerback who, after an impact, became unresponsive and almost died on the field. But because of the kind of emergency response that Marty is talking about, not only did he survive, but he also survived to play again and still remains an active football player. Marty, please continue.
Got it. Thank you. So again, when you look at these 21,000 high schools across the nation, and they have, you have resources. So meaning, yeah, our second state is Georgia. So Maryland and Georgia are my primary states that we have our flag planted in. Yeah, schools down south. Yeah, you're right. Some high schools look like colleges I've been to, but they take football very seriously. I just came back from Texas week before last. Texas is a high school football country. Some of the little towns, they have nothing but Friday night football, right? That's what the whole town is somewhat, that's the entertainment for the whole town. Point that I'm making is when I say resources, meaning they may have an athletic trainer, right? They may have one athletic trainer per school, but you may have 10 to 15 different sports. So a lot of times, we can say these things, or they may have the schools that don't have the resources may have the school resource officer doubling down as the football coach. You know what I mean? So it just depends on, what they are, what they have. And as you said it earlier, Harold, it's different when it becomes a business, right? So yeah, a professional athlete, that's their business. A collegiate athlete nowadays, their body is their business. At the high school level, they still haven't gotten it. They're coming to practice unconditioned. We got a different type of kid now where they more so on the couch playing video games versus, all these different things. I'm going to tell you, when the coaches from University of Maryland were at our kitchen table 3 days prior to signing day, I asked two questions. I said, of course, as any parent would ask, I didn't know anything from a what could go wrong perspective. What could go wrong at a Division I college? I asked two questions. Can Jordan get some playing time? To which the coach's answer was, if he comes to camp conditioned, he can apply for a job. And the second question was around mental health and substance abuse, because that was just my business at the time. That was it. So you see where the level of accountability gets higher and higher at the levels that you go to. You're expected to come to camp prepared or conditioned, right? At the high school level, that's just not the case yet. Depend if it's an elite school, but the average schools that I was in Clayton County the first day of football practice, and the first week of practice starting, and you should have saw some of those kids where they were struggling.
They weren't ready.
And again, I think that that's my space. High school, youth football, secondary schools. A lot of times, I think that it always boils down to good decision making, first of all, and coaches have to have a level of common sense to say, guess what? I can look at you and see you ain't ready. I can look at you and see you ain't ready. But again, just be realistic in their acclimation process, because you got 7 to 14 days to acclimate, meaning you need 7 to 14 days to physiologically get prepared for the elements. Would you agree, Dr. Strudwick?
Turn your microphone on, Dr. Strudwick, please. Go ahead.
I would 100% agree. with what you just said. And the interesting thing about this area in the DC area, for DC public schools, they all have athletic trainers.
Sure.
They all know the kids inside and out. They watch the kids closely. Every football game in DC for DC public schools, it's required that a doctor is on the sideline. And generally, it's not, we think of doctors, we think of orthopedic surgeons, broken bones, sprained ankles, but it's generally not an orthopedic surgeon, because most of the problems that the kids have are more physiologic, like we're mentioning, heat cramps, heat exhaustion, potentially heat stroke. I have not seen that in the DC area, at least in a while, in high school level. But there's a doctor at the game to watch the kids and make sure that those things don't occur. And if they do, there's immediately treatment, or at least immediate recognition.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Strudwick, I don't want to forget the question that I asked earlier about walking us through the steps that parents should be aware of, and that you would hope coaches and athletic directors would be aware of if their child is on the practice field or even on the playing field and gets overheated. What are the steps, kind of 1 through whatever, that under a serious situation would help keep them alive and during one of these emergencies?
Well, number one, the parents have to be realistic, about their kids' fitness and what's going to happen when they get out on the field. We see the parents that push the kids a little bit too hard, so they have to be realistic from that perspective. The coaches have to be aware and again, realistic about the fitness level of the kids, put things in place, make sure upfront hydration is important, and continuous hydration as they're on the field practicing. The main thing that happens first with these athletes is heat cramps. So that's the first sign that the physiology of their body is imbalanced in terms of what's happening. Their muscles contracting and running and sweating. Heat cramps occur. So when those occur, you take the kid off the field. You stretch them, you hydrate them, you give them, some appropriate treatment. A lot of times that's the trainer that's doing those things, and then you keep him out of the game until he's, you have a sense that he's better. Certainly, if we get to heat exhaustion, which is rare, the dizziness, the nausea, potentially the slight confusion or off balance, that kid's not back in the game. There's no, I don't care if he says he feels better, coach, put me back in the game. That kid does not go back in the game. That kid sits on the sidelines, hydrated, cools, and comes back to fight another day.
And I know that Marty had mentioned, for example, an ice bath, if it gets to an emergency cooling down. And I'm trying to make sure that we have a picture of what that would look like if somebody needs something like that as an emergency measure. Does that mean that the player is picked up pads and all and dunked in the ice bath, or would he have to have his uniform taken off? I'm just trying to get an understanding of how something like that would work in an emergency situation.
Well, I can speak to the ones that I've seen. They're right in the ice bath. Not with their helmets and pads, but with their undergarment, socks, right in the ice bath, because it's an emergency. Time is tissue. So that's what I've seen.
Let me jump in on that, Harold, because this is what I do on the daily. This is what I do. Really keep in mind, like, first of all, a heat-related injury isn't going to happen in a game. Heat-related injuries, these tragedies always happen during practices and conditioning, right? So the main thing is, and this is what I tell all my parents, and this is what I tell all my coaches. I tell coaches, every parent in America thinks that you are a medical professional. You're not. You're a volunteer. I ain't never met a coach yet that was a doctor that went to medical school, right? And every parent, I always tell them that I know y'all think coaches are medical professionals, but they're not. They know just as much as you do. So a lot of the training, first of all, you got to plant seeds at home first, right? Everything starts at home. Because do you really think a coach going to ask, hey, are you hydrated? Let's say a youth coach. At the high school level with an athletic trainer, they can take the urine test. They can make sure, your urine is the right color to show that you're hydrated. Depending on resources, again, all your bathrooms, you got your are you hydrated sign. So it's basically like at the urinal in the bathrooms, you'll have everything from a light colored urine to a dark colored urine. And that'll kind of tell you, obviously you could tell yourself right there. A lot of times with coaches, man, these is volunteers at times. Like I said, at the high school level, yeah, if you got an athletic trainer, like Dr. Strudwick said, the AT is in touch with, they know the kids. They know which ones, they know which ones have pre-existing conditions and all that. But a lot of times what I really see, and I'm almost embarrassed to say that I never met an athletic trainer until we walked into the ER. And now I'm asking questions, but Jordan went to a school with resources. They got an equestrian farm. So they got all the resources, but nobody never made the bridge to say, in the event of something happening, this is the person that the medical professional at the school is going to be the one that attends to your child. And a lot of times that's not really what happens. When I do trainings, I only use athletic trainers to do my trainings. So if I'm doing parent education, we're educating parents to say, this is who's going to save your kids. The coach's job is just to win and to win as many games as he can. The coach's job isn't to handle medical emergencies. It's just not. Yeah. And that's just sports in general. Like I said, I haven't met a coach that was a medical professional as of yet. Yeah, we all get the trainings, the CPR trainings and the cold water immersion trainings and all those things. But at the end of the day, it's going to be an athletic trainer that's going to save your kid. Or I always say, the more educated that we all are, the safer all our kids going to be. But depending on what level that you are and the resources that are in place, that's when these type of things happen in a sense.
And honestly, with some coaches at the high school level, depending on what part of the country you're in, and depending on the priority that is placed on, let's say, football, like we said before, the coach may be that coach's only job, and that coach may also have a staff. But in some places, that coach may also be the English teacher or the math teacher as well, and may have other responsibilities. And which, again, as we've seen, let's just take, for example, the state of Maryland, where the team plays is also obviously where they practice, and there are bleachers. But if you go to, as you said, Texas, or when I worked in Alabama, down south, where there is an enclosed, not covered, but enclosed stadium for high school football, and AstroTurf field, and a training facility that looks better than next door where the actual high school is.
Right.
And we may laugh a little bit about that, and we could have a whole conversation about educational priorities versus sports. But the reality is that in some parts of this country, there is more emphasis and priority placed on the football team than the chess team.
Yeah. I mean, I would speak up a little bit for the district as well.
Yeah.
All the athletic trainers in the District of Columbia are certified and licensed by the Department of Health. So that's one thing. And I, again, I'll get back to the impact of Jordan's life, and the contribution that these things are prioritized now and in place to protect our children.
Yep. Yep.
Speaking of protecting the children, Marty, if you could talk to me about the Jordan McNair Student Athlete Heat Fatality Prevention Act, this legislation that you've helped spearhead to Congress. Where are you with that? Kind of talk to me about what your experience has been with this right now.
Yeah, so let me tell you the wins. Let me tell you the wins. So we've gotten 3 laws passed at the state level in Maryland, 1 law passed at the municipality in Baltimore City. So we got the Jordan McNair Youth Safety Protection Act. Jordan McNair Youth, that's in Baltimore City. So that ensures all organizations that fall under Parks and Rec have to be trained with the basics. So when you look at sports, you look at the 4 H's. So the 4 H's are heat, heart, head, and hemoglobin, right? And basically what that means is that cardiac arrest, heat-related injuries, concussions, and sickle cell, blood, hemoglobin, right? These are all of your 4 main culprits when it comes to sports-related tragedies in a sense. So that's our first bill we got passed. Then we got 3 laws passed in the state of Maryland. The 2 that are more significant. The NIL bill in the state of Maryland is named under Jordan. That's called the Jordan McNair Safe and Fair Play Act, right? And then we have House Bill 836. We worked on that one. And what that mandates is, Harold, at the end of the day, keep in mind, you can have the best the best cold water tub on the field. You can have the best AED machine. You can have all these resources. But if you ain't got a solid emergency action plan, a well-practiced emergency action plan, that means squat. That's like having a smartphone without knowing that it's a smartphone, right? So our last bill, to me, which is our most influential bill, is House Bill 836. And what that does, that mandates that, hear what I'm saying, mandates that the emergency action plan is practiced every spring and every fall season, before every spring season, before every fall season. So what that does, that ensures that all the safety equipment, the AED machine is within a couple minutes reach, a cold water tub is within a couple minutes reach. And again, it ensures that this is practiced consistently. And an emergency action plan, for your listeners that don't know, basically is a fire drill, right? So, you go to a fire drill, you go across the street, wait for the clear sign, come back. However, every time you walk on the field, a fire can happen in sports. Literally, every single time a fire can happen just like that. So my experience at the congressional level is this is our 3rd time going up. My wife is a political junkie in our house, and she usually tells me that my optimism can be, I'm just glass half full type guy. And I remember the first time we went in front of Congress in regards to the NIL bill some years ago. And then when, thanks to, Congressman Kwesi Mfume, and thank you to Senator Angela Also Brooks on this one, when they came to me a couple years ago, I told them, I said, no, this is a great idea, but you need to add high school student athletes to this, or at high schools. Luckily, they took my advice, and here we are again, resubmitting. The thing at the congressional level, we want to create a baseline standard where the same principles to react to an emergency, especially heat, are the same consistently across the board. Baseline standard. We don't want it to be 50 different versions of this or how many other states. So you always want to create a baseline standard. I think that my experience at the congressional level has taught me to be realistically optimistic, right? If we get shot down, guess what? Let's go again. We get shot down, let's go again. So to me, I think that legislators have a responsibility to protect everybody in the United States, and most importantly, to protect the millions of kids that this type of bill will save.
So why do you believe that this has not become, a federal law? This, to me, we're talking about the safety of young people in a sport that nearly everybody loves, for example, or all athletic, all sports. It seems like to use a football euphemism, a chip shot.
Right. Man, I'm gonna tell you, same way with the DeMar Hamlin bill. That got passed last year, but until it comes in your living room, now it becomes relevant. Until you see it, like nobody knew until. And I keep referring to DeMar Hamlin's case. everybody saw that. Even if you weren't a football fan, they replayed it. So again, once everybody's society, or once all Americans saw the value of an emergency action plan and the value of them increasing the statistics for saving his life, then it became something of value. But until people see it, or until it comes in your living room, now it's relevant and it has value to try to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. So where is it now?
We resubmitted within the last 2 weeks, and we'll see if it gets approved or not. And then I would love for it to, because really it's definitely needed. But like I tell you, at that level of legislation, man, it's like I say, realistically optimistic.
Yeah, Dr. Strudwick, I have just a couple of more minutes. I'd like for you to kind of close this out with some final thoughts for parents, and some of the risks that their children who do play or practice in extreme heat. What should they know? What would you tell them?
I mean, it's all about prep. So make sure that they're very well hydrated before they get out on the field, and they have access to water, and potentially Gatorade as well, electrolyte drinks, throughout the practices. That they, also the things that anybody should do to make sure they wear the appropriate clothing. We have technology now. We have the sweat wicking clothing that helps to the evaporation of the sweat, that helps to cool the body. Take breaks. Make sure that that's built into the practice. If the coach isn't building it in, then you have to, build it in yourself. Breaks in the shade, and just keep an eye on things. Make sure that your kids are moving appropriately. They're not stumbling. They don't look like they're confused about what potentially what the play is or what they're doing on the field. So just be mindful of their behavior and their functioning overall. Cramps. Make sure you address them, immediately. There's also a condition we haven't talked about. It's called rhabdomyolysis, where muscle.
I'm sorry, Dr. Strudwick. I think you may have dropped out. Marty, you were nodding your head. I've got about a minute. You are familiar with what he was talking about? Turn your microphones on, gentlemen, please.
Yes, absolutely. One of the main things that I always tell parents is, especially at the youth space, when it's warm, 3 things that will save a life in a heat-related injury. I mean, a heat-related scenario: ice, water, and towels. Heat-related injuries are 100% preventable, right? They aren't a bad thing. However, but when they become mismanaged, that's when they become tragic. And when it comes to parents, I always tell parents, you make the executive decision. If it's too hot and your child needs to go out there, because one of the things we learned the hard way was the game of football did not stop because Jordan McNair and countless other student athletes across the nation died.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good place to end this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much, Marty McNair, Dr. William Strudwick. I appreciate your time. Hopefully we've been able to provide information to help those parents and student athletes perform well, but do it in a safe and healthy environment. That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, August 4th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.